Before we get going, I'm just going to say, I'm going to, just to make this show up a little better on YouTube, the plan is I'm going to do most of the talking to begin with, and then save your questions till the end, and we'll go over and go through them however we need to. All right, so I'm here to talk to you a little bit about mining, and not specifically mining, but specifically how, sort of a little bit of the history of mining. Unlike my taxes talk, I actually have a qualification to discuss this one. I've been interested in a long time. I typically teach at NAPE, although I'm not teaching there this year. I also have a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering, where I did some work on FPGAs. We'll talk about what those are in a bit. I did also in grad school, I worked on designing ASICS a little bit. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in designing ASICS because it's a whole world of itself, but I've, touched the software, done the stuff a bit, and have some idea of how it all works. So before we get going, let's just sort of establish what mining is. And I know most of you have some idea of what mining is. Mining is the process of adding transactions to Bitcoin's public ledger of past transactions. So it's intentionally resource intensive. So it's called proof of work for a reason. If you have worked enough, you have proven that you've worked enough, you may be lucky enough to actually create a block. And it basically involves a brute force attempt to solve a problem. The way that I like to think of it is as a series of locks. So if you go and you try a whole bunch of combinations totally randomly, you may unlock something which is, which if you hit that combination, you have the right to create that block. And once you've created that block, you are rewarded with it. Currently, you're rewarded with 12.5 Bitcoin, and whatever those transaction fees that we were talking about in the previous slide, those transaction fees also get added to given to whoever goes and creates that block. And the more people that are mining at any given time, the more secure the whole Bitcoin network is, because you're competing against everyone else to try and unlock that code. I'm not going to go a whole bunch. We could talk about mining and all this stuff for a really long time, but that's not what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to get into sort of more of the hardware aspect of it. Now, difficulty is set every set such that blocks are supposed to be created every 10 minutes on average. So somewhere in the world, someone is going to find that correct combination every 10 minutes. And if they're created faster than every 10 minutes, roughly every 2 weeks, the difficulty will increase. So it'll say, well, you know what? We don't need this many combinations on or this many numbers on our lock. We need more numbers on our lock. It's going to be a more complicated solution. So this chain of blocks, our blockchain, goes back to January 3rd, 2009, and it was probably mined using a CPU. That's what they call block 0, and it had a difficulty of 1. So the 1 is just saying that this is our base level. If there's more people mining than just Satoshi, then it will get harder than that. If there's not going to be less people mining, I guess, but if there's more people mining than Satoshi, than the first guy that mined this block, then it will be more difficult than that. So CPUs. CPUs are central processing units. They're basically everything that's in your computer, your phone, all over the place. CPUs get used for all kinds of stuff, industrial computers, whatever. They're great, they're relatively cheap. They have one downfall, and that's that they can only really do one thing at a time. So what's happening when you're trying to do a hash is it's computationally intensive, and those, given the CPU has to process only one thing at a time, it makes them relatively slow for doing a brute force problem like mining, where you're just trying to like bang out solutions and try as many different things as you possibly can. So multi-core processors exist. So if you have an 8-core processor, you can do 8 processes at a time. Like I said, they're relatively easy to program. They're relatively cheap. You don't need dedicated hardware. You can do it on a laptop. You can do whatever you want. And this is what the state of mining was at the beginning. So from 2009, when Bitcoin was born, to late 2009 or 2010, CPU mining totally dominated. Because there was basically no one had actually put in the energy. Bitcoin was basically worthless, and nobody put in the energy to try and come up with a more efficient system of doing it. There was, quick reminder, the first Bitcoin transaction was in 2010, and it was 10,000 Bitcoins for 2 pizzas. So it's, my point for putting that in there is there was very little financial incentive to say, all right, how can we do this better? It was like, oh, I don't know. It's more like, what the hell are we going to use this for? Was more the attitude at the time. And as more people started doing it, the difficulty went up. In October 2010, mining difficulty was 1,300 times more than it was when Bitcoin started. So we can look at a little graph of this. You can see for the first year, there was basically no one was mining other than Satoshi. Very, very few people knew about Bitcoin. Very few people were actually mining it. And as Bitcoin sort of became a little bit more known, we can see that we ended up shooting up a lot right before October 2010. So a 1,300-fold increase in the first 18 months, thereabouts. Because the next big game changer, or first big game changer in mining, was the release of code for GPU mining, graphics processing unit. So historically, GPUs were used by gamers, and the code to mine Bitcoin was released in October. I suspect, if I had to guess, I would guess that some people had probably written the code earlier and hadn't released it to everyone, and that they had a massive advantage in mining. This is my speculation. This could be popularity. This could also be people devising their own code and not releasing it to everyone. The big advantage of GPUs over CPUs is that they're intended to handle multiple instructions simultaneously. So if you think about a video game, you have a gazillion pixels in your gaming frame, and each one of those pixels has to be calculated to render a nice image. And if you're trying to do that in real time, when you're playing a video game, each one of those pixels has to be calculated. So they were devised to do a whole bunch of things in parallel at the same time. So they had much faster hashing power, up to 100 or over hundreds of mega hashes per second. Like I said, they were a little bit more difficult to program than CPUs were. But it also for some people, if you were setting up a big mining operation, you needed to go and buy some dedicated hardware in order to do that. They're much more energy efficient per hash than CPUs are. The difficulty rose dramatically after they came on the market. So yeah, June 2011, we'll talk about sort of why that is important. It's in our next little topic here. And we'll have a look. The other thing that was interesting, in February 2011, Bitcoin actually hit parity with the US dollar for the first time. So instead of 2 pizzas costing $10,000, you could now get $10,000 for your 10,000 Bitcoin. Or sorry, 2 pizzas costing, you know what I meant. You know what I meant. All right, and GPU mining, it was really the first time you started to see people kind of take this somewhat seriously. I remember looking on YouTube videos and going, oh my God, and I counted like all these miners and went, this guy spent like $20,000 on GPUs. I was like totally blown away because I mean, there's an astronomical sum of money and these guys were mining, you know, it was totally unheard of at the time. It was just, people were putting together these mines. So, a little frame of reference for you. Here's our October 2010. Still looks like absolutely nothing is going on. We still look like we're at zero. By June 2011, we were at 1.4 million times more than day one when Satoshi started. So GPU mining, again, we saw basically the same graph on the previous slide, except this time the scale is 1,000 times more when we ended up using GPUs. The next stage in this whole thing was what are called field programmable gate arrays, or FPGAs. Now that's where my expertise, I don't want to say lies, but has lied, because I'm not working at that at the moment. So it's a programmable logic gate system, and the big advantage is that it uses less energy than a GPU. So what you can actually do with an FPGA is you can basically design your chip and say, okay, I want this thing to connect to that. It's kind of like a little bit like physically going in and connecting wires up to something and connecting stuff up and making it happen. They're very fast and efficient. One of the big disadvantages was that you, unlike a CPU or a GPU, as soon as you're in the FPGA world, you needed dedicated hardware. There's not a lot of resale value you can always resell a GPU if Bitcoin doesn't work out or whatever. You're going to have a lot more trouble selling a Spartan 6 development board or whatever. It's like, all right, here, anybody want to buy this? Like, what is that? You definitely have dedicated, or not totally dedicated, as we'll see, but more dedicated hardware. And then they're a lot more difficult to program. So you have to program them in these obscure languages called VHDL or Verilog. I assure you that those hardware description languages are a pain in the ass. I think that would be the best descriptor to work with. So this was, I love this picture. This was, somebody's mine. You can see this is somebody managed to get their hands on a bunch of FPGAs. They programmed them. They've got a bunch of spaghetti wires kicking around. It was still a little bit of a hobbyist thing. You could still do a lot of this sort of stuff in your dorm room or whatever without drawing too much attention to it. But it wasn't quite the industrial process that it is today. Now, FPGAs dominated until January 2013 when the ASICS came out. And the reason that FPGAs are, one of the reasons they get used a lot still for different things, not specifically for Bitcoin mining, is they're a stepping stone towards ASICs. So what happens when you're designing an ASIC is you first have to, you basically prototype your design on an FPGA. And once you've got your design done on your FPGA, you can then take that same code and port it over to your ASIC, more or less. I'll talk about more what that process looks like. First FPGA was introduced. It was just a matter of money before ASICs were designed, and the Bitcoin price as of January 2013 was $13 per Bitcoin, and the difficulty was, and I'm missing some zeros on there, I think. think I'm missing some zero. And nobody has the difficulty from January 2013 memorized? No, I didn't think so. Okay, all right, come on. Come on, everybody, work with me here. Okay. No, I'm not missing, oops. I'm not missing one. Okay, so FPGA mining, you can see this was our big run-up due to GPUs. You can see the difficulty dropped off a little bit down here. The price dropped as well, hence the difficulty dropped. And then you can see the FPGAs were really seriously deployed around here, and you saw a massive jump in the difficulty once again. So went from whatever we were at up to 3.5 million. Right before ASICS came out. So the first ASIC was released January 2013, and it used what's called 130 nanometer technology, and I'll talk more about what those things mean in a little bit. The speed was 72 gigahashes per second. Giga. The most basic way to do it, to come out to do this, is what they call, and you can't see this at all, is to use what they call place and route. So what happens is you basically take your FPGA design and you hit a button. It's not quite this simple. You hit a button and you say, make me an ASIC out of this, and it will go and use all the automatic stuff and create that ASIC for you. So I'm oversimplifying, I realize, but it's a much easier way of doing it than actually going in and trying to do a whole bunch of customization. It's relatively cheap to do once you've actually got your VHD, once you've got your FPGA designed. So the first ones were relatively quick and dirty. They're like, all right, here we go, bang, here we go, send it out, and we're good to go. I say quick and dirty in the sense that they are, the design process is relatively simple once you've actually got your FPGA put together. The other side of it is that they are very expensive to actually get built. It's one thing to have a design, it's another thing to actually have a fab go and make your chips for you. Starting price is in the millions of dollars to actually get someone to build these chips for you. Basically what you're doing is you're starting with a bunch of pre-designed blocks. So you start with your pre-made blocks, little Lego blocks or whatever, and you hit a button, the software makes it, the software goes and places all of this stuff for you, and you're good to go. They're cheaper to design and they're a lot less risky because you've actually got you're basically working from your FPGA design, and it's relatively riskless. So I forget even where we were. We were down here when ASICs were 3.5 million. Right, okay, thank you. We were down here at 3.5 million when ASICs were released in January 2013. And again, that looks basically like dust when we compare it up to our 50 giga, whatever. Gigillion. We'll go with gigillion. I don't know what it is either. So, massive run up there in those 2 years right after ASICs were released. The next, now, and I'm giving you sort of a really broad overview of how this stuff works. Most companies don't say, oh, we did a full custom or we did a place and route or whatever. So I can't tell you who did what exactly when. But the next step in this process is what they call a full custom design. So a full custom design allows for customization of the entire circuit. So rather than taking your building blocks and just putting them down, full custom, what you can do is you can actually squeeze more stuff into it. You can build your own blocks. And if you're building your own blocks, you can make them more energy efficient. You can make them smaller. You can do all kinds of little things to try and squeak out a little bit more out of your ASIC. It's a much riskier approach, but it potentially has much better results. Cadence is the software that's sort of the standard that everyone uses for laying out chips, and a license for Cadence was around $80,000 a year 10 years ago, and I just took a shot at it's around $100,000 a year per seat for every person that you want actually designing stuff. And this is, like I said, undoubtedly what everyone is doing nowadays, because everyone's actually in an active competitive environment trying to create better ASICs. A quick note about what this whole nanometer scale is. Basically, the way that it works is if you say, you see a 7 nanometer chip, that's the smallest possible resolution that they can make. So they have 7 nanometer chips is kind of the cutting edge right now. If you recall, the first Bitcoin ASICs were at 130 nanometers. And the way that it works is we start at, basically the cheaper option was 130 nanometers. Now that there's a ton of money in the system, there's a lot of design effort that goes in. They're basically at the bleeding edge of technology. There will undoubtedly be more other ones, smaller things, but we're basically at, what the current technology is for doing these sorts of things. Current difficulty is, and I've lost track of my zeros here, 6 times 10 to the 12 times more difficult than it was when Satoshi started. So ASICs are the end game. We basically were started at CPUs, then moved to GPUs, then moved to FPGAs, then moved to ASICs, and then worked our way from ASICs right down to whatever the, sort of the cheap ASICs right down to the most expensive that you can actually get made nowadays. As time goes on, Moore's Law will continue to shrink the size of the chips. The next step, people have some stuff working in 5 nanometer, 3.5 nanometer. Moore's Law is undoubtedly going to slow down at some point, and it has slowed down some already. But we are getting smaller and smaller chips nowadays. And the advantage, of course, of having something smaller is that you can squeeze more stuff into the chip, and you can also it also takes a little bit less energy to move things around. So they're much more efficient the lower the resolution of the chip. And just graphically, I always love these charts because, and I probably should have done it on a log chart, but it's great. It looks like absolutely nobody was mining until, I don't know, January 2016, which of course isn't the case. It's a massive arms race, and everyone, I am constantly amazed at how much more, I was amazed like in 2015. I'm like, I can't believe how much the hashing power is going up. This is insane. That was 2015. And it was still, down in the dust, looking like almost nothing. So yeah, it's phenomenal. It's exponential. We've seen a bit of a pullback here recently, largely because of the fact that of the price. And the price effect wasn't really felt until a few months after, because these things take months to order. So people ordered a whole bunch more ASICs. The ASICs were in the pipeline was full, and then everybody started getting them. And then they went, oh my God, I can't make any money at this. And that's where that squeezed a lot of the marginal miners out. So yeah, anyway, that's I hope that's given everybody an idea of what's going on in the past. And I can't predict the future, but I think mining difficulty is going to continue to go up. How's that for a prediction? Yeah. Anybody have any questions? No?
I was wondering, why is it so expensive?
Why is what so expensive?
Like the ASIC manufacturer, is that just like a licensing thing? Or what was
No, okay, so...
do it at a mass scale?
Yeah, so the reason that making ASICs is so hard is basically what you're doing is you are taking a bunch of plates and you start with a piece of silicone that has to be super, super pure. And the smaller the resolution you get, the more pure it has to be, because any impurities are just going to blow the whole thing up. So you need a pure piece of silicone. And then when you go and make it, you basically need these masks that go on top of it. And those masks need to be precisely made so that when the light shines on them, or the radon beams, I'm not an expert in making things, but basically as you get smaller and smaller and smaller, making those things gets insanely expensive. So I have some friends that have worked in the semiconductor industry, and they're like, I don't know, various workstations to do all of this stuff. The equipment is insanely expensive. And then, yeah, trying to get all of those things to perfectly line up is very, very expensive as well. And particularly when you're dealing with the sort of first generation of stuff, like the 130 nanometer is, okay, yeah, you can get that stuff made relatively cheap, but dealing with a 7 nanometer process, which is cutting edge, everyone's still kind of figuring their stuff out, and they're not really sure how to build it, and so, yeah. And
who was the first company to release the?
So that was Avalon Miner. Yeah, there was 3 companies that were sort of all racing to be the first one to create ASICs. There was Avalon, there was Butterfly Labs, and KNC, thank you. And so, everybody, and Avalon beat everyone to the punch, got a bunch of them out there. Everybody else came on afterwards and maybe made money on their ASICs, maybe didn't. So, same as, if you see, it's always interesting to see, I know I was looking at a Decred miner in the fall. I wasn't actually looking at buying one, but I was kind of curious as to how all of the economics of it worked out. And it's like, all right, so Bitmain is making this thing, let's say their cost of production is going to be, production, manufacturing, all that kind of stuff is like $50 million. And I just sort of pulled a number out of the air. And I looked at the amount of Decred that was getting mined in a year, and it was like $40 million. I'm like, or I'm making up numbers. I can't remember the calculation. I'm like, this is not going to be profitable because there's only so much stuff that's getting created. So you see that a lot with a lot of the other coins that people build dedicated mining equipment for. Is you'll see if you actually go and calculate how much of that thing is getting mined and how much money it costs them to actually go and build these chips and send them out. There's just not enough money on the table for everyone. It's unless the price goes up, of course. So, yeah. Anybody have any? Yeah.
So when you talked about the first ASICs, you had the figure of 130 nanometers on the one slide.
Yeah.
So at that time, if I'm remembering correctly, that was still pretty, like you could buy an Intel.
Absolutely, yeah. 28 nanometer was I believe 28 was the cutting edge at the time.
I'm just trying to figure out how that pipeline works. Are those like old fab facilities that
Yep.
maybe back in the day were
Yep.
putting out CPUs, but now those are left over
Right.
for whoever's doing?
Yeah, so if you think about your computer, right? In your computer, you've got a whole bunch of different chips in there. Some of them are doing a bunch of different things. You got the one that you've got your CPU, or your CPU, GPU. Those are typically the cutting edge ones, and those are the ones that are going to be, if you pay the most money for your machine, you're going to be getting the cutting edge of those ones. And when you get those, that's awesome. But your sound card, well, sound is pretty tried and true. You probably aren't going to be using, you don't need like gazillion gigabits per second for audio. You need whatever. So when you go and when you look at those, there's still useful fabs where they're still making this kind of stuff, but you don't use those fabs for making the best stuff. You use it for making, I don't know, USB chips and mice and and that sort of thing. So there's still, there's still useful fabs. They're not making as much money as they were when you first built them, but it's also a tried and true technology. You can say, all right, well, this is a tried and true technology. Check, we're good to go, and it's not going to be quite as expensive, or it's not going to be, I shouldn't say that. It's not going to be anywhere near as expensive to make those with a tried and true technology that's been around for a while.
So maybe just speculating in the future, so if we have fabs that are 3.5
Yep.
nanometers,
Yep.
and we have a big Bitcoin price pump,
Yep.
does that mean we're going to get slower Intel CPUs in our laptop because they're all that prime manufacturing capacity might be going to ASICs?
I can only hope. I can only hope, yes. It would be great that, I mean, quite honestly, the amount of money that's been pumped into the semiconductor industry because of mining stuff is phenomenal, right? It's amazing.
And can it, is it an elastic kind of thing? Like, can it respond to more demand? If all of a
Slowly.
sudden there's 10x more demand for the 3.5.
Yep.
Just based on Bitcoin, can they build those fabs quickly?
Not easily. No. It's definitely a time-consuming process. You can't just say, all right, hey, let's come up with a couple $1 billion and start building another fab. And realistically, my guess, and this is my guess, is that the semiconductor manufacturing facilities are going to need a lot of money to make sure that how do I put this? You're in line behind people that buy a whole bunch of stuff, like Intel, like Samsung, like all of those guys. So those are tried and true customers, and the fabs know that they are going to be getting, they know that they're going to be getting repeat business from them. If they suspect that Bitcoin is not going to be around or isn't going to have the same level of demand, they're probably not going to put you right in the queue with, all of those guys. But again, it's sort of a question of money, right? It's, if you see another, if Bitcoin's $100,000 a coin, you're going to see a ton of money pumped into this, and this whole thing is going to be, it is a real player in the chip making game, and it's going to be even more so of a major player. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's me speculating, but.
Yeah, I'm just curious, with the halving, just a little over a year away.
Yeah.
And say, for instance, if Bitcoin doesn't pump up to when the halving happens, is that going to cost a lot of these ASIC, a lot of these mining rigs to shut down and stuff? Because if that gets cut in half and the hash rate is going up, presumably,
Yep.
Until then,
Yep.
it's just kind of impossible for these guys to make unless they got free
Yeah.
power. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a miner. I'll be honest, I don't know. I can only speculate. But all things being equal, I guess there's a couple of things. One of them is the fact that you've got this drop. This wasn't brand new mining rigs being unplugged. This was more legacy mining rigs getting unplugged. So that drop was people, with 3-year-old machines that were ridiculously profitable here and are no longer profitable there, and they're unplugging them. Again, this is me waving my I don't really know wand, but I'm going to also speculate that this is new mining equipment coming online. So Bitmain, this was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that's roughly when Bitmain was shipping their 7 nanometer chips. So you're seeing a tapering off here of the legacy stuff, because the price is relatively flat in here, right? And as the price the price didn't go up until over here when we saw a 20% jump. But this is probably the new stuff coming online. So you're going to see this sort of constant turnover. I think the halving is potentially very bad for miners, particularly if we don't see any fee increase. But at the moment, you're getting however many Bitcoins coming into the system every day, and those are being bought up by someone, and there's going to be half as many being produced in May next year. So
it was like the last halving, there was lots of fears, and I remember even feeling some pause myself, like, oh, is this going to mess up the economics? The event kind of came and went, and nothing really happened. Like the difficulty kind of stayed the same.
yeah,
So I would kind of expect that there'll be similar kind of fears, but it'll probably work out to be a non-event.
yeah,
And there's also things like futures contracts nowadays, where if you are a miner and you're worried about your costs, you can sell your future Bitcoins today on the futures market, right?
when was the last halving? Do you remember?
It was
4 years from 2016.
Summer 2016, yeah.
So what's your take on the?
Just missed it.
Summer 2016. There we go. Didn't really do
What's your
much.
take on with like last year, all the news articles going around about how mining, all the environmental implications of all this?
Yeah.
Do
So.
you think it's overblown? Or?
So I think that the world is constantly scouring for cheap or free sources of power. I think that this drop in difficulty is a reflection of the fact that people do have to pay for power and they can't just keep mining stuff for free. So what's my take? Yeah, I think that things like Steve mining in Lloydminster is going to grow a whole bunch, and you're going to see more and more things like that happen over the next while. I'll be honest, I'm not too worried about it. Yeah. I'm an Albertan, and I feel like it's our. It's okay. There was an election yesterday, wasn't there? Okay, all right. Fair enough. Awesome. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just one historical quibble. So back at with the pizza day, I understood, maybe I got the story wrong. My understanding, but Laszlo, the guy that sold the pizza, or that bought the pizza,
I think, yeah.
I recall hearing that he was the first guy to implement a GPU mining thing.
Oh, it could be.
Appears to be that was May, and you had GPUs coming online, I believe, later.
Yeah, it's possible.
So either maybe I got the story wrong in that he bought the pizza
Yep.
and then figured out the GPU stuff later, or maybe he was one of the first people at the very, very beginning that had the GPU.
It's entirely possible that I got my story, that I got my dates wrong or my story wrong. I will. It's interesting to kind of, it's funny how you know this stuff as it goes along, and you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. That's little stuff. You're like, shit, what date did that happen? And you go and try and find it online, and God, it's impossible to find. So it's totally possible that I got the.
It's one of those folklore stories too. Like people will write books and probably have different accounts. Of
Yeah.
the same events, right?
Yeah.
I got an article here saying in October 2010, the code for mining with Bitcoin's GPU was released to the general public.
Okay, but did Laszlo have it at the time of the pizza?
That would have been 6 months before that.
6 months
Yeah.
before.
He was probably rolling it solo.
And that's sort of one of the cool things, right? So you see these, you're okay. Wow, look at this. Well, the code gets released. I don't even know where we are. This is GPU stuff. Okay, let's go back a bit. The code got released in October, but maybe somebody had written some code a little before that, right? It's and you see that with some of the shitcoin ASICs, right? You look around and you're like, okay, wow, look at this. Oh, the ASIC got released right here, and you're like, well, what about those 4 months before it? What caused it to go up a whole bunch? And it's And so you know, there are things, there are people, you know, there are guys in the world that look at this and go, okay, well, if we develop our own ASIC and we start mining this coin on our own before, and we just don't tell anyone about it, they'll go and spend $30 million, develop an ASIC, run it in their own mines, and mine like 98% of it for themselves, just in order to, and before anybody actually finds out about it. So I know that this has happened. I can't remember which specific coins they were, but I know that's happened. Butterfly, yeah, Butterfly Labs was definitely, so Butterfly Labs was, and again, I can give us a history lesson for forever if we want to, but Butterfly Labs was one of the 3 first companies that was you know, selling mining equipment, and they were actually rated by the FTC, I believe, and shut down because they like, oh yeah, here, we'll sell you this pre-order, blah, 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 blah. And then they said, okay, well, we better go and design something. And they went designing stuff, and the whole thing was a big gong show, including them mining, you know, mining with, you know, doing testing, break-in testing on your equipment before they shipped it and all that sort of thing. So it was a big mess, and I only wish that people went to jail, but they didn't, to my knowledge.